Thanks so much, Winston. Thanks for the generous introduction. And as Winston said, I'm a general internist and a health services researcher at the University of Chicago. I'm a member of the National Academy of Medicine and currently a member of its governing council. And we're all delighted to invite you to today's session. We divided our 3-hour webinar into 3 parts. This first part will be a conversation with 2 distinguished leaders, Victor Zhao and Jing Wang. The second will be a panel of Asian American leaders on a variety of leadership issues. And we'll end with a third panel on research issues involving Asian American health. As Winston said, Victor is one of the most eminent leaders in American health and healthcare today, president of the National Academy of Medicine. And Jing, she's the dean of Florida State University's College of Nursing. And for something like improving Asian American health and health equity, it does take a village. At the same time, it takes people to get the ball rolling. And as Winston said, I want to reinforce that it really is Jing's leadership that has brought us to this point of having this webinar and starting this initiative to try to advance Asian American health and health equity. So a big shout out to Jing for her leadership and commitment to the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community. So we're now going to engage into a conversation. And the discussion will be about leadership issues as pertain to Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders and health. And we can start first with just maybe like Victor and Jing, if you can tell us a little bit about your own personal leadership journey, and maybe you can start, Victor.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Winston, for this very kind remarks. I'm very proud to be Asian American. I was born in Shanghai, China, and I'm an immigrant. And like many of you who are Asian Americans, whether you're first generation immigrants or others, I think I share with many of you the journey that you all have. And but let me just simply say that, just the fact that we're all together discussing our experience, just addressing equity and leadership is so important in this community. As you know, we are a mighty community, but still small. And frequently, I think that living in a more complex society like such as ours, particularly we are people who are different in terms of culture and looks, and now being part of this American society, I think there are many challenges. So maybe I can start by just simply quickly talk about my journey. My family and I fled China when I was 5 because of the communist regime. And I still remember the first memory I had was getting off the train, going from North Shanghai or Middle China to South across the border to Hong Kong. It's what you see on television these days when you say, oh my God, this is what it looked like in Ukraine. That's my first severe or serious memory of. And of course, the early days was very difficult for my family, myself, having lived in, shall we say, challenging times in different ways. We had a family of 5 that lived in one room without kitchen, bathroom, you name it. So there was a lot of impression as a young man. And when I grew up old enough to be 18, I wanted to go and study medicine and went abroad to McGill to study undergraduate medicine. And as I was studying medicine at McGill, I became very, shall we say, attracted to the idea of science and medicine, and hence went to Boston for my residency and really had many great role models and became physician scientist. But, always in me is the idea of service and leadership. And that has influenced me in a big way, so that along the way, I became chief of cardiology at Stanford, then chair of medicine, went back to Boston, the Brigham Women's Hospital as chair of medicine, and then subsequently at Duke as CEO and chancellor, and now here where I am. I'll say 2 things. One is the idea that whatever we do in terms of research or patient care or administration, or what I do now in terms of policy, I think our North Star is so important. And being Asian American, and understanding my background really, in many ways, bring me back to the importance of work with community, work with people, and work with equity. So I think that is so key. Secondly, is the issue of mentorship. I would have not done what I was doing had I not had people who believed in me. A young man from Asia, 7 years after I got off literally the plane or the boat, as they say it, people gave me opportunities to do so many things that I think had it not been the case, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. And so I think we need to be sure to understand this growing people around us, as Chinese philosophers have said, And I think finally, I think about this as the need for us to take responsibility to help our community and to help our community not only of clinicians, scientists, scholars, but also our community of people. And, we are great culture of Asian Americans, not just only Chinese, but all Asians, bring tremendous value to this country. And we need to also make sure that we help everyone to achieve that potential, which we all deserve. So let me stop here.
Thank you for sharing that initial story there, Victor. Jing?
Yes, well, I'm so glad to be here. And I think, offering some different, what I call myself, a grassroots approach to leadership roles. And now currently being a dean. I'm a first generation college student. I'm a first generation immigrant from mainland China. And I wanted to be a dentist or a physician, end up in nursing, but kind of fall in love in nursing and staying in it and trying to really enjoy this journey where I started with my tenure track career in Texas. In my third year, I started to have interesting leadership development program where I could have chosen between an NIHK award or what's called Nurse Faculty Scholar Award with Robert Johnson Foundation. So I was exposed to leadership at a very junior stage of my academic career, meeting with all the deans across the US in nursing, learning about strategic planning, finance in the academic health center, when I was still trying to write a grant and get a grant. But I think all of those experiences have really exposed me to a lot of deans that I never would have thought that I myself would become a dean today. And I think I really would like to share that there are different pathways and there are programs that can help you become an executive leader. And that's why we want to really champion leadership among the AANHPI community. And with the experience that I have, with the different programs I had experienced founding research centers on mobile and connected health at the time in my first institution, the Texas Medical Center, and later got recruited to be a vice dean for research and still maintain and founded a new center on smart and connected health technologies across research education, interprofessional education, and later have received fellowship in Josiah Macy Foundation to really developing, at the time before COVID, the very first interprofessional education curriculum, promoting the studying of mobile connected digital health technologies across the different healthcare professions. And then during my journey as a vice dean for research, I got into a health policy fellowship, the health and aging policy fellow, and really getting to know the larger landscape of how health policy plays a role in the area of health and well-being. And so I think I've grown in a very intensively trained or developed leadership program where it have really led me into my current position as a dean and still finishing my second year as a dean. So in contrary to Victor, I think can offer some insights and experience about the different pathways toward leadership. And then with leadership development, with the right kind of leadership development, mentorship and sponsorship, it is something that you all can achieve as well. I know there are a lot of eminent scientists here, and I have to sacrifice in an area where I felt like digital health, health equity, and the work that I'm doing is really important as a scientist. But I also feel like if sacrificing a very productive researcher in this field can produce a better environment for many, many more, I think it is well worth the sacrifice, and we would love to see more executive leaders across the academic health science settings, and how we can champion all of you to get there.
Thank you, Jing. So there is underrepresentation of Asians in senior leadership positions or leadership in general, some of which people have called the bamboo ceiling. And I'm wondering if you all personally have experienced bamboo ceiling or any particular leadership issues that had a special flavor to it because you are Asian American, as opposed to if you were not Asian American. And maybe, Victor, if we can start with you again, of like any personal experiences you can think of or can share with us.
Yeah, thank you, Marshall. First of all, I appreciate what Jing said and the importance of exposing clinicians and researchers to leadership opportunities, because, while it's maybe intuitive, there are certain skill sets you need to learn. At Duke, when I was the chancellor, I created the Chancellor's Clinical Leadership Academic Medicine program, which allowed, promising faculty, young faculty, to take more time off. It's a 6-month program in which they spend 4 to 6 weeks along with the School of Business School to learn management, learn financing, learn leadership skills, and then spend the rest of the time while they're doing their usual work, a project with the executive leader of the health system to work alongside with them, and then being able to report back on that experience. That was really important, because when we think about leadership in medical schools and health systems, I sometimes am too concerned, particularly health systems, that MBAs who have no real experience in health research and medicine are running these things from a business point of view, the corporatization of medicine. And so getting people trained from the medical arena, nursing arena, to be leaders is important. In this regard, so I think it's the institution that provides those opportunities. So as I said in my career, sure, I can tell you that no question, there are many cultural and differences and approach differences. Early in my career, I'll be considered an introvert. I can tell the story when I had my first several jobs in the lab, and the lab director was a really wonderful individual. I was assigned to a smaller room that had a door. I did my work in that room, and I heard socialization outside, but I did not open the door to join them because I felt it would be rude and intrusive in other people's activities. That's the cultural difference. Now, I know that younger people, this generation, may not see the same way, but nevertheless, I'm sure that they have certain learnings from their parents and others that our culture are not exactly the same. Now, the reason I'm saying all this is the bamboo ceiling. That Asians represent about 20% of the physician workforce and 25% of medical student enrollees. But yet 6% of hospital leadership and maybe 10% of medical school and maybe nursing leadership are Asian Americans. So yes, I think there is a disconnect. And I think most of the time it's because of the issue of stereotyping. Russell Reynolds, which is a headhunting firm, had done the study. In fact, Tom Lee, Vivian Chung, and Kevin Volpe and I wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine Catalyst about this bamboo ceiling. And really what defines good leaders in the current American society are more loud qualities, leadership qualities, such as assertiveness, disruptiveness, being able to be loud and lead. Whereas I think many AAPI backgrounds are more soft leadership skills, more vulnerability, pragmatism, connection, thoughtfulness. And, when they come to selecting leaders, I think that the bias is to look for people who have those skills of assertiveness. So in my career, I've been people said to me, certainly even as I've grown the ranks and become, leaders, division chiefs, division chairs, that, Victor, you're not quite open like all of us. You don't talk about your family and stuff like that. And I had to adjust to it. Now, most people would argue, Victor, you're not shy. I'll say I adapted. I did a Myers-Briggs assessment when I was CEO of Duke Health System and came out to be an introvert, and nobody would believe it. I guess the story I'm saying is because we face this, Marshall, throughout the way, our journey in terms of what's labeled as a good leader, what's labeled as a strong leader. And we learned along the way, and I had to learn it in such a way that I've adapted, to be sure. I'm not sorry that I adapted those skill sets because it is what it takes to lead in this country. But I am sorry that many people with even better skill sets than I have, those soft skill sets, are being overlooked. And I think this kind of, shall we say, invisible bias is always there, I think, for Asian Americans. And particularly, we look different, we talk differently, etc. So yes, I would say on service, I've had wonderful mentorship and I have wonderful people supporting me. But I do know that throughout my journey, it took me a long time to be accepted as one of them.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that story, Victor. That I think people look at you now and say, "Oh my gosh, Victor Zhao, great leader." And probably most people don't know that part of your background, that story. And for those of you who haven't seen it, it's well worth looking up those articles that Victor mentioned. Nijim Catalyst article that Victor's one of the authors from, Kevin Volp's one of the other authors. Kevin's the first author, I think. This interview of Tom Lee did of Victor on some of these issues. And in the Nijim Catalyst article, there's a citation to the Russell Reynolds article. Such a good point about different styles of leadership and how the dominant paradigm in the U.S. is like, I think, as you said, like loud leadership. And, I've had that experience also, I think, in terms of people's perception of me at times. And, that standard of like the loud leadership and at times an inability to see what you're calling some of the soft leadership skills, which are so important. Jing, same question for you. And I think one of the great things about this panel is that, we have medicine, we have nursing, man and women, and you're in an interesting position too, where like nursing is a female-dominated field. At the same time, probably the wider field of healthcare is not female-dominated. So the same question about like the bamboo ceiling, Asian American issues, and then maybe some intersectionality issues too. That and maybe you can think about this too, Victor. That the ways in which some of the challenges for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander men and women might be similar and different regarding leadership challenges. So, Jing?
Yeah, I certainly think that we have an interesting mix here that I'm from a profession where a majority is women, but I do recognize there are also lack of women leadership in medicine. There are dedicated programs such as ELAM that are supporting women leaders in medicine. And in terms of bamboo ceiling, I feel like I have never felt that strongly about the bamboo ceiling until after I became a dean. I think, throughout the career, I feel like I live in an ideal environment where I got so many opportunities for leadership development, probably even more premature, what I call it, than what it should be. In this, what I call a colorblind environment where I didn't really feel like because I'm an Asian or I'm a woman that I have experienced a lot of difficulties. But it's like looking back, when I looked back with some of the things that I have experienced, especially when people look at really the model minority myth exists for the Asian. We work really hard, we're really smart. So in a lot of ways, I'll give you an example for my promotion that I've been funded pretty heavily throughout my tenure track journey. In addition to the majority of my efforts being funded, I had 2 children, childbearing age as a woman, climbing up the tenure track ladder. And I still choose to teach because I'm passionate about educating the next generation. And I'm passionate about because I have gone to nursing, public health, and medicine for clinical and translational science training. How can I bring the groups together and be the voice connecting engineers, informaticians with the healthcare professionals? That the feedback that I would get with my promotion would be, you don't have any teaching, but I was like, my teaching portfolio is right there in my portfolio. How can you ignore that? And just because the fact that I even have a statement about, oh, you must be, you were pregnant and you had a baby, so like you may have done, less in teaching. And all of that, I feel like, well, why can't you just look at the materials versus what you see me as a pregnant woman in climbing up the professional ladder. So I do feel like there are a lot of, environment, which I don't think people did it intentionally, but it's, I was probably the first one for 7 or 8 years that ever had a baby in that school when I had one. So it's, I don't think people intentionally did this, and I try to understand it, but not having a work life environment that supported that, it creates a lot of challenges where I feel like when I become a leader, that I was able to carry all of those experiences that I have had as a junior faculty, as a woman, having children, or having to struggle or balance my career and my life, that I was very fortunate that, I had some of the protected time and the leadership development and the peer support that had really support me to really counter all of the things that happened to me. But I just wish that there are more leaders who will be more aware of all of these barriers and issues, not only for the AANHPI community, because we work hard or we're smart, so we need to achieve 200% more than others in order to have the same opportunities others have for executive leadership, or because you have accomplished too much within a very short time, you must be only really good in science. You're not very well-rounded to be a leader across different areas without even knowing what is the background, what is the experience this individual may have. And also, I also want to call out for women leader, no matter I'm in a majority woman profession or minority woman profession, there are a lot of challenges. And I think people have seen success from people, and people will struggle with making choices. Do I make a choice? I want to have a family, so I need to give up my career. I think there are ways where you can balance all of that. The only choice is not making a choice. There are ways where you can balance the work life so that you don't have to give up your life in order to be an executive leader in medicine or nursing or in health science. And I want to echo what Victor has said. That bamboo ceiling is the main reason why I decided to take up a leadership role is that I feel like I can make all the people coming to my office crying for just unequal treatment, unfair system. I can comfort them for that 1 hour. But the next day they may come back because the system is there. And having a leader who actually understands the challenges in healthcare, being a nurse, being a physician, being a healthcare professional, not just care about money in leadership positions, it's really important. Because when I was learning about leadership development, what I have learned is research is an investment. So from a business perspective, research doesn't, even our researchers are, we really value them. They bring indirect money to the institution. The investment is much more than what they bring in. So you really have to have a heart to support the knowledge, the generation, the discovery of knowledge, and be excited about it, being able to invest in resources and understand what is needed to support, no matter you are Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, or others, or other minorities, in really achieving what is best for healthcare. So I think having more of the health professionals be trained to be executive leaders really helps all. It's challenging, it's hard, but it can be very much rewarding. Like I said, there are a lot of challenges that are specifically just what I call reverse bias, that there are too many AANHPI representation in healthcare workforce. There are too many in science and technology. So we don't need that many of you. But yet we have seen the huge disparity in executive leadership roles and the healthcare workforce. So I think bring that up front with issues where we really need to emphasize how can we leverage the culture, leverage what we are good at, but also inspire all of you who probably are still considering, or why should I give up my research to be an administrator or executive leader? It comes with sacrifice, but there are a lot of rewarding kind of components where, I'm happy to share more, but I guess I'll stop here to just say, this is what I have observed, what I personally have experienced. And I feel like having a leader who has that shared understanding will really help promote the next generation and promote more leaders in this community.
Yeah, thanks, Jing. And just a heads up for the audience that there will be a question and answer period in about 10 minutes or so that our colleague Ignatius Bao will be leading. There's an app, Slido, that you can submit your questions in Slido, and we'll be able to ask those questions of our panel shortly. Victor, I'm going to ask you the same question, that you're an outstanding mentor, and I've seen firsthand how good you are, that I've appreciated your advice and your support. And as a mentor, you've mentored a diverse set of trainees, including Asian American women. And so the same question, that what's your sense of like how the leadership challenges are similar or different for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander men and women?
Yeah. So first of all, I really appreciate what Jing said. It's not easy to begin with. We know there's challenges being women in medicine and the leader and women leader in health and medicine. It's with all the challenges that we all know that women face. And it's really great to see Phyllis Wise there, because I think she's one of those amazing women who's done so much, an Asian American. So I think I appreciate with her because the challenge she has is dual. First, being a woman and then being Asian American. And because people think about Asian American women as quiet, right? More a follower than a leader. And being able to speak up, sometimes you may get people's reaction to say, oh my, who is she? Sometimes positive and sometimes negative. And I think we've come a long way, certainly in the arena of female scientists and female clinician leaders. At the Academy, as you know, Marshall, being on the governing council, we worked so hard on diversity. The last 2 years of election, we got 50% women. And of course, almost 50% underrepresented minority. So I think that's, to me, one of the first important things to do is to provide the opportunity, the equity issue for everyone who deserves it. And so the dual challenge of being an Asian American and a woman cannot be easy. And so, Jing, my kudos to you. And of course, you're still quite young, and being a youthful leader is another something that I'm admiring, because again, people can always have this kind of bias to say, well, no, this person's young, why don't I listen to them? And we, like you, as you know, you're one of our scholars, etc., is very much interested in elevating and helping and mentoring emerging leaders, Jing being one of them, to be almost like a, shall we say, younger membership of our academy. Although we haven't changed our bylaws to include another category, we certainly work with them, and many of them have actually come on later on to be elected. So it's just wonderful. Yeah, I think when I look at this whole issue, I think our job is to, as Asian Americans, to begin with, of course, it's as leaders to serve the nation. There's no question the nation needs people of all colors and all background to lead and serve in order to serve the diversity of our nation, our population, and the diversity of opinions and experiences to make this a better place. Our second, not necessarily in that order, of course, is to serve our community. Here, I mean the community of, first of all, of our biomedical community, but also our population. We haven't talked about the equity issues about the Asian American population, but certainly I think with our background, we have a great obligation to be sure that we are their voice and that we provide them with the support and care that they need. As Jing said, we are, quote, a model minority. So I think it's really important to point out the inequities and the diversity, even among Asians, that so many different nations, that we're not all the same. And therefore, people look at it as if it's one single, homogeneous group. It's not. And also importantly, of course, is the stereotyping that we need to make sure we overcome. And more recently, the many hate activities, hate incidents among Asians, particularly during COVID. And then, so finally, as we said, is what do you do about the next generation? When I was younger, I would go to many Asian American organizations and talk to them about, the challenges young Asian Americans feel. At the time, I was still very much kind of I was assistant, a social professor, a number of years from my experience as an immigrant. And, and that generation, the difficulty was their parents are more like me, who are immigrants, and the next generation, they are now really a lot more Americanized than I am. And so the challenge they face in terms of trying to deal with the cultural issue, expectation is, quite different between families and the outside world. I think now, as I said when I was younger, I see a very different group of generation of Asian Americans who are, of course, fully incorporated in the society, but still have the heritage and the culture from their own family. Their challenges are less so than the earlier group, but still significant. Here's what I tell them. I think it's really important to recognize and be proud of your heritage. What you can do is you can bring so much more than others by bringing your Asian American background and your culture and your upbringing, your values to the American society, and meanwhile also incorporating the new opportunities that's afforded in this country. So I think you have to be proud of yourself, being yourself, bring your unique strength, but also at the same time understand that you live in a much more diverse community which you need to function in and be successful. I think that in mentoring Asian American students, researchers, clinicians, you name it, I think the main important thing I tell, which is no different than any other culture, is do your very best and have your passion. Love what you do and put your very best effort in doing this. And secondly, know your values and your North Star. And for me, certainly is service to a community. I've done my research. I still do research. I do clinical work, but my feeling right now is I'm best placed to be able to be a voice and be able to look at how to serve the nation, as Jing's doing, as Phyllis and Winston's doing, Ignatia and you are doing, in finding ways to serve the nation. And I think also to make sure that you provide the support, and as Jing was saying, to the younger people, in particular when they really need support, they face setbacks. Be a good listener. I talk about the soft skill and the hard skills, but I think we all learned this. And Marshall, you've taught me that as well. Certainly during COVID, when people are mistrusting scientists, government, and clinicians. And the trust issue is so important that the people you want to mentor, they have to have trust in you. They have to be able to know that you have the best interest in their heart. You have to be a good listener before you start preaching or telling what they should do, and actually understand where they come from and what they need. So these are the important issues in my mind. As far as career is concerned, I don't think you can have an engineer career. There's no linear line of a career. I would have never expected to do what I'm doing. I started wanting to be an average doctor, serving people who are poor, to become a physician scientist, to become an administrative leader while maintaining my passion to do what I do today. And as you know, I work in communities, I work in global health, because these are fundamental values. So my feeling is when people ask, how do I become Marshall Chin? I said, well, there's only one way. You can't plan it. You got to love what you do, have passion what you do well what you do, and then have your fundamental values. People will see your talents and give you that opportunity for you to seize, and you can decide whether you want to pursue this path or that path, and that's where you're going to end up in the right place for yourself. I think careers are just very exciting if you don't kind of engineer it and get too stiff about what you want to do, but in fact, go after what you love to do most.
Thank you, Victor and Jing. And I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to have Ignatius, our colleague Ignatius, join the conversation. I'd also point out, too, that there's one of the existing National Academy of Medicine efforts, which is a structural racism series of papers. It's about 8 papers that'll be written, and Ignatius and I are part of the group that's writing the Asian American paper on structural racism. And it reminded me of your point about this image of stereotype Asian American woman as quiet, right? And we thought this issue of sort of like stereotyping images, media was just so important that we specifically invited as one member of the authorship team for this paper, an expert in media and communications, because it is such an important issue of imagery, stereotyping, how that becomes a dominant narrative within a culture, sometimes with adverse effects on different groups. So last question I'll leave you with before Ignatius joins us is that, one thing I like about all your comments is that you have the nuance there, so that you're mentioning, for example, the times are changing. So like today's generation is a little bit different than, when we were growing up, some of the issues. And so you're not necessarily saying, well, you just superimpose the same solutions that may have worked for us, on a new cohort of folks that is a little bit different setting. When I work with Asian American students at University of Chicago, there are some students who in our pluralistic society don't quite know where they fit in, because a lot of times like the national dialogue on equity is sort of a white-black issue, and as Asian Americans, where do Asian Americans fit in? So any advice then to, again, like our young Asian American trainees and colleagues as they're growing up, of where do they fit in with this pluralistic society as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders? So similarities and differences from other groups and all, but any advice particularly how we fit into this complex tapestry of our country?
Jen, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think I felt strongly that we need more of you in leadership positions, and I think for young people, which I have seen a lot of younger generation. I think they're looking for role models and they're looking for more representation. That's why another reason why I feel strongly about championing all of you who are close or who are interested in exploring to really step up and be leaders. And I think my advice to the younger generation, or who are the emerging leaders like I am, to really be bold and don't be afraid to ask for mentoring, sponsoring, or help. Dare to dream and dare to work smart and not just work hard. And I think we have to really counter those stereotypes that people put in us without even looking at who we are, what we have done. So, and dare to challenge the status quo. And having that, what I call humor and humility combination 2-edge, to really do it. And Victor, when you mentioned age, I have people just coming to me and saying, you look too young to be the board of trustee at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And I just laugh and I say, well, thank you for that. I take that as a compliment. And I think sometimes it gets really hard when you're in a leadership positions. There are a lot of challenges, but sometimes you just have to laugh through it and have that humor and humility that I am not the smartest ever in the room, but I hope that I can support all of the smartest people in the room to the best of my ability. So I really encourage all of you who may think that, oh, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that. I'm an introvert. I have been very quiet, but I can be trained to be that leader that is needed to support the population, the community, and the organization. You need to have a good heart and believe that good will prevail and have that authenticity, but also recognize that in order to get your voice heard, you need to learn and have that self-awareness and reflection about how you can get your voice heard first before you can be in a position to make sure the right thing happens.
So Marshall,
go ahead, Victor.
You used the word tapestry. I think it's a very well placed word because a tapestry has many different elements, but it comes together as a single whole. So my feeling is that we are part of a society, and what's really great America, and I don't need to be corny about this, is the diversity. I mean, I really appreciate there are few other countries that has the diversity of population that we have. And I think that all we want to do is recognize that and being able to get there as really a whole rather than the individual parts. So the way I look at it would be, if our young people say, where do I fit in? I say, you ought to fit in as an American, as part of the whole tapestry, and work for the greater good together. But don't forget to look at your differences and speak up when you need to. So having Asian Americans at the table is important, not only because of the leadership service that it needs to provide the nation, but also the diversity of background, opinion, and being able to speak up and being able to, say, teach more about specific interests of different groups and different groups. So I don't see that as a conflict at all. I see that they ought to be working their very best to be able to do what they do best, and then being able to recognize the difference and speak up when they need to, because certainly Asian Americans need their voice to speak up.
Thanks, Victor and Jing. I'd like to introduce my colleague and friend, Ignatius Bao, who is a lawyer, and he has an extensive background in health policy, working in foundations, community-based organizations, really an expert on the big three of health policy regarding access, quality of care, and cost. And Ignatius will moderate discussion with the audience. And so if there are any questions that come in, Ignatius, maybe you can share those. If not, curious then, like just your comments and thoughts reflecting on what you've heard so far from Jing and Victor.
Thank you, Marshall, and thank you, Victor and Jing, for sharing your journeys and sharing so much of your wisdom along the way. There are a couple of questions that have come in that I will try to get to, but let me first go to Jing. One of the things my father always said was, you can't avoid having your Chinese face. And I think, you know, wherever we go, when we step into a room, if we're in a board meeting, if we're in a leadership role, we can't disguise who we are. And so talk about not just sort of your individual leadership, but how you feel like you represent the community or the communities from which you also come from. And I really appreciated Victor's comments about, you know, thinking about the community as people and always working with them and not just for them.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it's people who have come to me and talked to me about how they have felt me being in the room or being at the table or being in the boardroom that has really fostered the diversity of thoughts and diversity of opinions and what I bring to the table. I guess I I would not myself even thought about the impact that I could have made, or when I appear in a room and what kind of impact that I could make. Being an Asian woman and being the experience that I have, I always feel like I'm just not the smartest in the room ever, but it is so important, I guess, when I being kind of representing an Asian woman and all of others who have come forward and let me know that having that representation really makes a big difference in how they have seen that I represent the community who's not in the room. And a lot of times I'm struggle with, even that's not my personal opinion. If I feel like there is a group that is not represented in the room and I have worked with that population, what I speak will be on behalf of that population. So I have to counter that a lot during my conversation with people, just because I have worked with a lot of African American population in my research, rural, Hispanic, and of course, my career growing up, seeing a lot of bias and racism toward the Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, just across all the subgroups, where all of that experience have prepared me that I have my personal opinion, but I also felt so strongly this group I also represent sometimes in the room. So with that group, what do I represent and what are the different opinions that I need to bring forward for people to notice these things? So I think that kind of summarized my personal experience in this area.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions that came in, and I'm going to ask both of you, so Victor first, would you advise for folks who are looking for mentors and help in their leadership development journey to look specifically for another Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, or it doesn't really matter? What has your experience been, in terms of who has been influential and helpful to you, and who have you helped in turn? That clearly you've been a mentor to more than just Asian Americans. You've been a mentor to people from many different races and backgrounds.
It's not an all question, it's an and question. I think you can have certainly more than one mentor. And mentors bring to you different skill sets and different needs. So for example, if a mentor is Asian American, I think that's wonderful, because particularly when they can share your journey and your understanding and provide you with advice. However, sometimes mentors are helping you with your research and your career, which may be somewhat different. And they don't all have to be in the field that you work in. I think mentorship by definition is someone who cares about you, who actually is not biased or judging how you do, but give you the opportunity. So I think what I would do is I would have several mentors, create that close relationship, and each one will bring together and along many different help, assistance I can give you. Certainly in my own life, that's been the case. I had several mentors, and because of them, lots of things have happened well for me because of the advice, etc. So to me, it's not it's an and question.
And I want to echo that. I think when I was a Robert Johnson Nurse Faculty Scholar, we talk about we have a football team of mentors and sponsors. Sometimes it's getting too much, but you do but I think as a mentee, you need to recognize different people have their different lived experience and training experience and leadership experience, and how should you absorb the things that you need to develop yourself. So I also have mentees who are struggle when they have more than several mentors and could not make a decision on how to move forward when there are different opinions amongst, the mentor team. And I myself have observed leaders, physician and nurse leader, arguing one thing in front of me about me. And so having that agree to disagree across different professions, from the most prominent people in the US on medical nursing education, has brought me that courage to agree to disagree, because others have shown me how to do that respectfully, loving each other, but don't agree with each other, because this is what we care about, this issue. So I think it's situational, and I think understanding how to work with these mentors is also important for me. I started my PhD working for a dean as a research assistant, and all my careers, I felt like life is all about how you make of it. I don't think all those mentors just really liked me and gave me more time, but it's how I make the mentoring or sponsorship easy. And I encourage all of you to do that. If you are encountering cultural issues, find an AANHPI leader. If you're encountering research issue, you don't need to worry about, what's the racial or ethnicity. So I would say, like, really understand what you need and talk to people, but make it easy. Also understanding, everyone needs a work-life balance.
So thank both of you, and thanks, Marshall, for moderating that session. Let me turn back to Dr. Winston Wong for some closing remarks for this first hour.
I think we had a fantastic first hour, and I really felt that Victor and Jing were so generous in providing their personal narrative, which is really so important to the audience here. One of the takeaways I really thought about is, as Dr. Zhao said, and I think Jing said this, there's no lack of Asian faces in health and in medicine and in biology, biological sciences, but there is a lack of Asian voices relative to our presence as individuals that contribute to the field of medicine and health. And much of this is a real internal journey for us to find our voices as Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Native Hawaiians, and amplifying that to make a contribution in the tapestry of how we're going with American medicine. So I want to thank again our leaders here for really providing some very personal stories that really makes me so much appreciate them in terms of not just what they've done professionally, but what they are reflecting on and sharing with regards to how we as a community can advance forward to make the voices of Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders more pronounced. We need to give up on subjugating this part of our identity to really make our fullest contribution to the advancement of equity in American medicine. Thank you, Dr. Zhao and Jing.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you all. I think we are transitioning to our second hour of this webinar today, is to our leadership panel. We talk about we want to champion more leaders in the US in healthcare. And part of this championing all leaders is we would like to have a very eminent list of leaders that have risen up to the executive leadership level across the academic health sciences. And we would like to present all of you to all of them. I think we have 6 of them here today with us, and we'll ask each one of them to talk for 5 minutes about their pathway. And please know that in our website, you will find all the bios of each one of the speaker and panelists for the today. So we will not go in depth with introduction for each one of them, but you can find their bios on the website. So really, I think for this leadership panel, we would like to really set the representation of AANHPI leaders across the whole spectrum of academic health sciences. And what's their leadership journey, what leadership development they have experienced that have brought them to who they are today and where they are today. And talk a little bit about how were they able to break the so-called bamboo ceiling that it really exists for a lot of the AANHPI healthcare workforce in the United States. So with that, I'm gonna introduce our very first panelist, Phyllis Wise. Victor has mentioned you quite a number of times. You have really had a fabulous career where you've been dean, provost at University of Washington, and chancellor at UIUC, and also has been a former CEO and president of Colorado Longitudinal Study. And maybe, Phyllis, you can start telling us about, you have been in so many top executive leadership positions. What's your journey, and what would you like to share with those who need inspiring leaders like you to tell us your journey, how you get there, and what some of the lessons you have learned?
So Jing, first, I want to thank you so much for including me on this panel. I've already learned a lot, and I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot from the next future speakers. I have to say that I wish I could say that I knew I wanted to be an academic leader when I was young, but I would be lying. I have just been the recipient of a series of lifetime opportunities that presented themselves as part of my life and who provided me advice, sometimes before I even knew I needed it. So my beginnings were that I am the daughter of 2 Chinese immigrants who came to the United States from China before the Japanese takeover of China. And from the very beginning, education was hammered into our lives. And if you are like most Asian American children, when your parents give you advice, it's not really like they're giving you a choice. It's really that they almost, it's a foregone conclusion that you will follow their advice. Since my parents were both scientists, my mother was a nurse educator and my father was a MD, PhD researcher. The idea of becoming a biologist was actually the only thing I was ever introduced to. I resonated so much with what you said, Jing, and what Dr. Zhao said just now, because being both an Asian American and being a woman meant that I was a double minority, or I am a double minority. And I always felt I had to try harder, because if I succeeded, I was still considered an exception. And if I failed, then it meant that all women and all Asian Americans were not going to be qualified to do. So I always had that pressure, I would say, to try and excel. And I'm not sure I always did, but I always wanted to put in a lot of effort to do that. I found myself observing other successful leaders. Just watching how they behaved, how they handled tough situations, how they handled committee work. And I really do believe that leaders are not born, but they are successful because they've had opportunities and have been very observant of the people around them. So for me, the turning point in my career was really being mentored by an African-American PhD in a department of pediatrics, so a real minority. And what he said to me very early on was, Phyllis, I've been watching you and I think you will get bored if you just stay in your narrow research area, that you should really think about being the chair of a department. And he said, I will help you. I will help you to get nominated, and I will help you to actually write that letter of interest. I will help you to prepare for interviews. I mean, I was so blessed. It never occurred to me that I should be thinking about that. But again, I was lucky enough to not have to seek that kind of mentorship. But if you are observant, I think when you go up to people and ask them to help, I've never been turned down. People really enjoy trying to help you. I think you need to lead with your brain and your heart. Many scientists are very analytical, but they don't let their gut and their heart lead them. And I think they're both important. I think that the impact of developing a team is so critical, because leadership is not about me. It's really about us. And I always changed positions by going to a new institution. So I spent the first several months just listening and learning about the culture and the history of the new institution that I was at, because I think that you can't make assumptions, because not every university is like every other university. I think if I were to give just a little bit of advice, and I really want to receive advice and not give advice, but if I were to give any advice, it would be to balance the urgency of now and long-term planning. And as you get into higher and higher leadership positions, the long-term planning, the strategy, the including people with very diverse backgrounds becomes more and more important. Now, it's true that every once in a while, you're going to be faced with a really urgent situation where you can't just keep on talking and talking and talking. I remember one of the wonderful people that I worked with said, you got to know when it's important to stop stirring and start painting. And it is true that it's really important to think about when a decision has to be made and when you can take your time. I think for academicians, it's really important to understand that universities have got to get out of being the ivory tower, that we have to listen to the community around us. And I don't mean the university community, I mean the town, the state that we are in, and learn from that situation. And so that we don't get counted as people who just always have ideas but never listen. So I don't want to take up a whole lot more time, but I have to say I feel like I've been incredibly privileged to have been an academic leader and in some great universities and have had time to change higher education in the broader global community at a time that has been so important, and to work with an incredible teams of hardworking, creative, energetic, visionary innovators. So thank you, Jing, for allowing me to be part of this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Phyllis, for sharing your experience. Next, we're going to turn to Dean Lin Zhan. She's been nursing dean to different institutions, and we want her to talk to us about her experience being a dean, current dean at UCLA School of Nursing, and her long-standing journey in being a dean in 2 different nursing schools. How have you come here, and what lessons and learned you would like to share with the audience?
Well, Jean, thank you so much. I'm very humbled and honored to share with an esteemed panel here. And I just quickly listened to last panel summary about the voices. So I just want to use my 5 minutes to share my experience. My really leadership started with when I was the first only nurse selected to study in Boston Mass General Hospital back to 1985. And that was very scary. Nothing you knew, and China just opened to the world. But I think during that time, I think one of the things very clear to me, what is the purpose? Why I'm going to USA? What do I need to do? So as Phyllis talked about, and the education in the Chinese family is so instilled. So fast forward, and then I finished all my graduate degree in Boston. And then I became professor and directed the PhD program. I was so happy. Then I was approached by someone say, because of the shortage of nurses, and I want you to be the dean. I said, no. And I said, I love what I'm doing, and I'm very comfortable what I'm doing. Then she said, you know what? Because what you did. However, I just want to warn you as the Asian American, and because when you become leader, you needed to advocate for something. And this is immediately say, Asian Americans are very quiet. So I said to her, I said, watch me. I will never be quiet if it's the right time to say right thing. So doing this, actually fast forward, and being in the nursing dean in the private university in Boston, and then the public research university in Memphis, Tennessee for over 10 years. Now the UCLA, from the east and the south to the west. And I think the different cultures, different organizations, Philip said it so well, because you cannot make an assumption in institution the same. And the policies, politics, and the people, all these challenges across the institutions and across the geographic areas. So reflecting almost 15 years as the Dean of Nursing, and I think it boiled down to keep your passion. And what is your passion? And also have a purpose. That purpose has to be shared. And the most important in this whole journey is the perseverance. And we know that in terms of the microaggressions, stereotypes, and everything. So they really, for me, the passion when I became the professor at UMass Boston is really look at the tremendous and health disparities. Because they call the Asian American like a model minority, but we know the influx of and people from Southeast Asia and the tremendous disparity, not only in the health, but also in the higher education. So I began really develop my passion, scholarly work focused on how we achieve health equities. And that led to publishing 3 Asian American Voices book. The first one is focused on Asian American cultures because they don't understand the culture. So therefore, reductionist and quickly and put as the stereotype towards Asian American Pacific Islanders. The second one really dive into and the Asian American vulnerable populations in healthcare. Even look at the healthcare data. And in the past is white, black, and others. And the Asian American data are really lumped together. And it becomes the data is useless in a way. And the third book, I really address the diversity in higher education and listen to the Asian American students' voices, and which called engaging, empowering, and enabling. Well, in addition to the passion, I want to really focus on in terms of the perseverance. You know, perseverance is very interesting. It's you never give up. And if you know that's the right thing to do. So during this leadership journey, I developed I think very important is the moral courage. You know, sometimes, and you actually doing something, nobody likes it, but that is the right thing to do. Also, sometimes you and have that moral compass to think about really, I'm going to give up or not. I just give one quick example. When I was at University of Memphis, there is a huge and budget shortfall. Immediately, they want to subsume nursing under and reconstruct the health sciences. At that time, Institute of Medicine mentioned about how we really, Future of Nursing recommended the major leadership role for the nurses in the healthcare. So, and the information already communicated on the entire campus. The newspaper already published. And so I could not sleep. I said, how can we strategically position nursing? So then the people actually I consulted all told me, Lynn, if you actually against what the president and the provost do, you are going to lose your deanship. I said, I don't care about deanship. I care about nursing profession, how the nursing can be strategically positioned. So therefore, I wrote the memo to the provost and the president. I feel better than my PhD dissertation. And that memo, I did not talk about myself. I talk about how we strategically position nursing. So I already prepared my letter to resign as the dean. But on Monday, the provost called me. He said, Lynn, I want to talk to you. So in that conversation, he said, I want to listen to you community partners. I want to listen to your faculty. And then in 1 week, they changed the decision. So that for me, I think it's leadership in a way. And I feel proud of what I did in a way is to give the best gift to nursing. So we have a tremendous challenges, but I do think perseverance is very important. In order to do that, you have to take care of yourself. And you have every day you wake up, even, and I want to share one of the person really taught me, is the MIT and the Peabody endowed professor, African-American. And he and we served on the panel together when I was at UMass Boston. This is what he shared with me. Lynn, if you want to be the leader, never internalize insults. And the second, he said to me, when the people talk about alternative, it is an alternative. Just keep your passion, keep your purpose, and do not give up if you think that is the right thing to do. This is what I share with the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You never want to take anything personal when you are in deanship positions, and that's really important to keep the sanity going. Well, next I would like to welcome Dr. Sharon Inouye from Harvard Medical School. Being a woman in medicine, being a professor, endowed chair, and center director, and also the incoming editor-in-chief in JAMA Internal Medicine. So I think you yourself here, being a role model, maybe share with us a little bit more about your journey. And you have a lot of hats, and how have you come to where you are today, and how can the audience learn from you? Thank you.
Well, I just want to start and say that all the speakers have been incredibly inspirational, and I am just so grateful and feel so lucky to be included on this panel of leaders. So thank you. Just a little about my background. I was raised in a traditional Japanese American family in Southern California. I'm a fourth generation American. And both my grandparents and my parents, though, and my entire extended family were interred in concentration camps in the US during World War II. And so that really colored how we were raised. And my father came out of camp. He served in the military, actually, in order to, he volunteered to be drafted in order to exit the camps. And then after that, he became a physician, and he served as a general practice physician in Southern California with a huge practice that was over half Asian. And he was really my hero. And from the age of, I think they said 2.5, I told him I wanted to be a physician. But I had 2 brothers, and so every Christmas they would get the doctor's bag and I would get a pink nursing bag. And I said, but Daddy, I want to be a physician, and it just wasn't, accepted in my family. And but I was determined, and I went against the grain in my family to become a physician, and the only woman physician in my family. And so I really wanted to follow in my father's footsteps. He was very proud of me eventually, after he realized he couldn't dissuade me. And so I kind of followed the pathway of physician scientists. I became an assistant professor at Yale, then a tenured associate professor and a full professor at Yale. And then I moved to Harvard about 15 years ago, where I started my center, NIH funded, and built a research center. And I always did clinical practice as a geriatrician and general internist, and also lots of teaching as well as research. And I'm entering this exciting new role as an editor-in-chief because I really, during the pandemic, I realized how important trustworthy information is and how important the journals were to assure that. And so I've become very excited about the possibilities of medical journalism. So I know you've asked us to talk a little bit about, leadership development strategies. What are maybe some practical tips or advice that we can give? I know you heard from several of the speakers how important it is to follow your heart. And I've done that my entire career, following my heart, into medicine against the advice and wishes of my family, following my heart into science and working with the older population. I think on a practical level, the things that have helped me the most, as you've heard from Phyllis and others, about learning from leaders that you admire and how just observing them, how they succeed, what they do. Dr. Victor Zhao's outstanding example. And so watching people that you admire and how they do things, and also getting, very good mentorship along the way. A practical tip, though, for people to really think about is I did do formal leadership training as well. One of the courses that I took is a year-long program called ELAM, the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine program for women, and very much helped me in my leadership pathway. And perhaps in addition to the formal training that's year-long, I formed a group, a learning community that I stay in touch with every month now, ever since. And I did that in 2014. I also participated in the Health and Aging Policy Fellowship, and that was wonderful to learn about policy leadership. And I also had an executive coach. And there you can customize, and I really worked on time management, conflict resolution, how you manage a large team. And those were really essential skills for me. And it's important to select a coach that you're a good match with, and it can take trial and error. So I was hoping that those tips might help people on their leadership journeys. I really encourage getting formal training in addition, because I think someone said that leaders are not born, right? They're made, and that's one of the hints. Thank you so much.
Exactly. Thank you so much. I think you reminded me all of the things that I have done also, and you just clearly laid out all of those ingredients and the things that you had, and I think many leaders in this panel today have had. So thank you. Well, next we're going to move to Dean Mo, Dean at the Lewis College of Nursing and Health Professions at Georgia State University. And I think part of, I think the unique journey Dean Mo can share with us is that I think we have heard that in order to, go up in your career ladder, you need to move around. And when I first heard about it, I was shocked. Why do you need to move? I think there are things that are saying, well, you're going to get more diverse opinions and different experience at different organizations. And I think Dean Mo can really offer us some feedback about, he has been an intern dean and then, taking on the deanship role. And we want to hear from you about your experience, and maybe there are different pathways where you can become a dean. And maybe you can share a little bit about what you have experienced being in the same organization, being intern, and getting into this position. Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. First of all, I want to thank National Academy of Medicine and AAPI-NA and NCPIP for organizing this webinar, and also for the organizers put together impressive speakers and the panel and programs. And it's really my pleasure to be here, and also deeply honored and humbled to be with many very highly accomplished and academic and healthcare leaders on the panel. As like many of you on the panel, and I was born in mainland China, did my graduate study there, and master's, and came to the US for my PhD. That was actually in nutritional science. I was, and then a faculty member in Texas for a long time, and over 14 years, and I was happy as a clam. And out of the blue, and one day a recruiter called me and said, well, this department chair position in Atlanta, would you consider? And I was, what is this job? And I've never been to Atlanta, so I don't mind just paying a visit. And one thing led to another, and the rest of history. I was department chair for almost 5 years in my current institution, and I didn't really move around after that. As Dr. Wang pointed out, so my leadership role wasn't really a purposeful, intentional pursuit. I think it would be, I would call it a serendipitous serendipitous situation that really presented itself. One day I was called into the dean's office and said, you need to be interim dean. What's happening? But obviously, my supervisor at the time got the assignment to be a different position, and I thought about it, and just, obviously, after that 4 or 5 years as a chair, I started liking what I have done. I can see that what kind of impact you can make as leader. That's different from as an individual faculty member. And I can imagine as a dean could have even bigger impact to the college, which has 6 academic departments and schools. And especially given the shortage of nursing and health professionals at that time, and still is, I think this position has a lot of meanings to me. We're helping meet one of the greater needs in healthcare professionals. So before I go into any of the strategies, and I really want to share one of the studies that actually stumbled upon right before I was preparing for this webinar. This was an paper authored by the Karen Goon at NIH and her colleagues, published in 2022 in the journals in Frontiers in Research Metrics Analytics. And so in that study, they found there are 2 themes. One is this strong leadership gap for Asian Americans in senior leadership in NIH. Asian Americans make 20% of the NIH permanent workforce, but only comprise 6% of senior leadership positions. And as they move up from the non-leadership position to general leadership position and then to senior leader positions, you see the percentage of Asian Americans drop significantly. Interestingly, that's not unique to Asian Americans. The other group that follow the same patterns, the Black or African Americans. So to that point, I think in our strategy in addressing the Asian American leadership gap, we really should put that into broader context, a minority leadership gap. When we work with other minority groups, our voice becomes stronger. And that's what we do at Georgia State. We have campus-wide DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs. We have various faculty identity groups, which include obviously Asian American faculty identity groups, and then the leadership form those diverse faculty leadership alliance. And also I think one of the strategy, obviously the other leaders and panelists have mentioned the mentorship. I think that's tremendously important. I personally have benefited greatly from mentoring from my supervisor and colleagues and support network. I don't think you can do it alone. And for future or emerging leaders, as Dr. Wang referred to, the same would be true. Obviously, as current leaders or emerging leaders, we now have the responsibility to pay forward, to make sure that we mentor others, we support leadership development programs. We make sure that the next generation leaders and Asian American leaders as well will have proper support and mentoring. And we have advantage points to do that as current leaders, or even past leaders. You have your influence network that can facilitate this kind of activity. And to that point, I really want to applaud this organization for doing this. I think this would help tremendously in terms of raising the awareness of this leadership gap. I think that would be a very important step as well. We don't have to talk to this group about Asian American leadership gap, but to the broader population, that's still not, I think, an issue that to get the attention or awareness that it deserves, and that we have a long way to go. So again, thank you for allowing me to be part of this very accomplished group. Somehow I feel that I really don't belong here, but I will take this opportunity to learn and listen. Thank you.
Thank you. You do belong, because we need to invite all of the others who are in the audience to feel they belong as well. So great. So next, let's move to Dr. Kumar Sharma, and I think he has some slides to share. So our staff may be able to bring his slides. Also, I think some of, a lot of you who are great scientists there are struggled about why would I want to give up my research and be a leader? Maybe I would be more comfortable being still just leading my research. And I think Dr. Sharma has been a leader, a division chair, vice chair for research in the largest department, the Department of Medicine at the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio, but also has maintained his research program, being the center director. So Dr. Sharma, thank you for being here today, and maybe share with the audience today about your experience, and maybe there is a way to balance both your research passion and being in leadership position.
Thank you so much, Jing. It's really a pleasure to join this very elite group, and thank the National Academy of Medicine, Dr. Zhao, and all the others for putting this program together. The slides are really not meant to be very inclusive of all of the ways of becoming a leader. I think many of the previous speakers have done an excellent job and have been tremendous leaders and shown the way to move forward. I think my own path is a little bit, maybe a little unique in that when I started out as a student in New York, I was one of the first minority students in most of my classes. And so I had a tendency to separate my culture at home and have a different type of culture in the school area, and I always have a sort of two different personalities, if you will, and then try to integrate it towards when I got into medicine and got into academic science. And what always drove me was science and research. I can't move these slides forward, so maybe somebody could do that for me. So what really helped me to move forward in my career is trying to find people who I would trust, both in science as well as in leadership positions, and try to learn from them and what made them successful, and really also what were their biggest challenges, and how I could learn from that and find novel and creative paths. And that's something that I've continued to do. When I started my scientific career in Boston and at University of Pennsylvania, we were taught that as physicians, if you wanted to do science, you would either do basic science or do clinical research and not really mix the two. And I never really understood why we shouldn't be able to mix the two. So I started doing translational research right from the beginning when I started out my faculty career, and continued to do that. And I think that's one of the really unique things that all of us bring to the table, is to try to bring new ideas and perspectives and ways that traditionally has not been done at the time that you start your career, and to be very inclusive. And one of the things that I've always been doing is working with PhDs and other health experts from different departments, from different subspecialties, and trying to bring people together to solve these very complicated problems. And I think that's one of the things I learned from Jing, is how important working with nursing and with allied health is so critical to really make a difference in medicine. And we work with the nursing team and pharmacists and other healthcare experts in the hospital, but we often don't do that on the research front. And working with Jing on a precision nutrition program, and working in with devices and bringing in AI to learning about how to do precision nutrition has been really fascinating. And I've been creating a new path for us, which is totally dependent on bringing nutrition, nursing, and medicine with basic science as an underlying theme to be able to do it in a translational way. So next slide, you could just, yeah. So I think the things to avoid that I've learned is not to be passive, and many scientists tend to do that, and perhaps a lot of Asian Americans tend to be passive and focus on their own work and not really bring out their ideas and bring it to the table when you're at meetings. And so the more I've gained confidence to do that, the more appreciated it's been. And I think for young leaders to be able to talk about their idea, their perspectives is really critical. And that brings their confidence to becoming a leader, because your perspective is maybe very different from others. And it's extremely valuable to addressing the problem. And the other thing I've learned in the last few years is because you're a scientist, you have a very clear way of wanting to solve a problem and bring up your ideas, but you always have to incorporate other people's perspectives. And teamwork is so critical in healthcare. And we don't need to have all the answers, but raise the important questions that are burning in your mind. If it's burning in your mind, it should come out, and other people should hear about it. And often that brings up a really stimulating discussion. So I think all of the ideas that have been discussed before, and the executive leadership program and mentoring is really critical. And perhaps one of the things that I would like to see more of is how to balance science with administrative responsibilities, so you can continue to exercise your passion, run a lab, do clinical translational research, and mentor young faculty and other physician scientists and other allied health scientists as well. So we have PhDs in nursing as well as PhDs in all aspects of science in our program. So the more we work together, the better the end product will be. Thank you so much, Jing, and all the others for this fascinating discussion.
Thanks, Kumar. I think it's a constant struggle for a lot of established scientists to make their decision whether they need to step into leadership or role or not. And I can tell you that I have known a lot of deans who can successfully negotiate resources. If they really like you to be a dean, they will make room for you to maintain and have the resources to support you to be successful. Maybe maintain, it can't be too much, maybe 20%. It's about the right amount. I have known a lot of leaders are being able to, through mentorship, you can realize your dreams of science, but still maintain a decent amount of research passion that you have. So next, I would like to introduce, last but not least, Dean Usha Manal. And she not only has been a dean at University of South Florida Health College of Nursing, but also Senior Associate Vice President of University of South Florida Health and Academic Health Center. So Usha, thanks for being here and share a little bit about your experience with us today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jing, and thank you to Nassim and to all of you as well. It's always an honor to come and speak before, others who, like me, give me a sense of belonging. So I'm an immigrant to this country. I came here 37 something years ago. And I'm a nurse. I've been a nurse for 31 years, but I wasn't one earlier. I did my first degree in English literature, and then discovered that maybe I needed a real profession, like my mother kept telling me, that English lit was not going to be it. And so then I, found nursing through a great mentor. I've loved it ever since, never wanted to do or be anything else. Most of the panelists who went before me sort of touched on pretty much everything I would say. I think the moving around piece has been important. I've been at 5 different state universities, and that was really for career advancement. It's sometimes difficult to find that where you are. And so that moving has been important, but it takes its toll because you lose your community. And for me as a researcher, I am a dean, but I'm still very active in research. And as Jing said, you find the ways to make it happen and you get the right resources around you. I'm still writing NIH grants and, running R01s. And so you lose that sense of community. My work has been in health disparities and health equities for my entire research career. And, you start over with a new community. It's also taken a toll on my family, right? Picking up and moving is not easy. So again, they lose a sense of belonging and community as well. But I've learned with every move, and that's been the most important thing, I think, for me, is to really understand why I was going and what I was bringing with me and what were those lessons learned. I've been here in Tampa at the University of South Florida for about 5 years now. Florida is not the easiest place to be. The weather's great, but it is a challenging place to be in higher ed at the moment. And those are some great lessons learned as well, in terms of being able to speak out versus not being able to speak out, and what are the priorities and when do you prioritize what at what time. I think I've learned some very, very hard lessons over the last year. In terms of strategies, I will tell you that one of the things that I have always believed in is to believe in myself and my vision, to have the courage of my convictions. If I was not going to be bold about it and believe in it, then there was no point in my trying to lead other people, along that path. And to be authentic. My faculty know this, my staff know this, and my colleagues know what they see is what they get. There is no hidden game with me. There's no hidden agenda. And if you're as committed as I am, then I'm going to give you all of that support. And that has been important to me, to develop that sense of self and identity, but then continue to be authentic to it and not change, who I was. That doesn't mean that I haven't learned to be more patient and, a better leader in many ways. And I did that through strategies, as mentioned before, some formal learning in nursing. We have the equivalent of the ELAN. It's called the ELAN. So there's that opportunity. I have learned to always ask in my startup package when I move for an executive coach. And this is almost like having a therapist on call. Believe me, it has been absolutely wonderful. And they're available to you to talk. They're your safe place. So it's not just about leadership coaching, but they're your safe place to go to if you need to talk through really sticky issues that sometimes you really can't do, in your office. I learned from the best mentors, I think, in the world. And I watched and I've tried to give that back. So finding great mentors along that journey, and you may have many different mentors, because you may have a research mentor, and then you may have an administrative mentor, or someone who's just, there like you on a life journey. So it's important to remember that one person isn't going to give you everything. So it's okay to have a group of mentors. And now I take pride in being able to give that back to my own faculty and to my staff. I hold regular career development sessions. If people have expressed a desire to advance in their careers at the end of the year, I send them an invitation to come and meet with me for an hour and just to talk about strategy and where they are. Building a network, very, very, very important. But within that network, having a trusted, smaller community that you can go to, whether that comes through your research network or your administrative network or some combination, I think it's very critical that you have a group that is your safe place and that you can go to. People mentioned this before in perhaps different words, but having a sense of humor. Don't internalize it. I have finally decided that if everybody in my college is happy with me, I'm not doing my job, right? Because somebody's going to be unhappy with you no matter what. And you just have to learn to shrug that off and to take, deep breaths and just let it go and know. The most important thing, I think, for me as a leader is when I make a decision, I ask myself, when you look at yourself in the mirror tomorrow morning, are you going to be okay with who you are? Are you going to be okay with what you did? It may not always be the right thing to do because I'm making a decision with the information I have at the moment or based on constraints, right? But did I do the right thing in terms of thinking it through and being absolutely careful that this was the right decision for me at that time to make for my college, for my faculty, for my colleagues? And that has driven me all along. I want to look back and say, you did okay. You didn't make a snap decision. You didn't walk all over people. You gave back. You paid it forward. I think that's really, really important. And then the last thing is a bold vision. I think sometimes we are not heard. We are, so as a woman, as an immigrant, a woman of color and Asian, you know, I've lived through many stereotypes. People expect me to talk a certain way. Yes, they don't assume that I am from where I am. People expect me to have, so why aren't you in medicine? I never wanted to go into medicine. My whole family didn't understand that either, but that's not who I wanted to be. So, oh, you must be really good in math. How many of you have heard that one? I'm really not that great at math. I still use my fingers to count, you know, like I did in Catholic school. So you live through those stereotypes, but you learn to step outside of them and gently educate people along that journey with you. I've learned being confrontational is not the way to bring people along, although sometimes it's necessary, as Lynn will tell you as well. But just teaching people along that journey as you go along has been important to me as well. So thank you again so much for your attention.
Great. Thank you, Usha. We can bring all of our panelists back in our highlight that we can entertain some questions. I'm going to start with some questions, but Usha, thank you for kind of reminding me about how before I sort of took on even the vice dean position, that I used to be a person who, where by any chance I can avoid a conflict, I would. And I would never want to enter any conflicting situation. I will avoid that and I'll be quiet. But I think part of the leadership development journey that I've had and training sessions, I learned to be very comfortable. It's bad to say I really love conflict, but it's loving to see the different perspectives and different opinions that have constituted that conflict, where sometimes it's good to have conflict. And I think as a leader, it's also important to, you know, recognize that sometimes conflicts are healthy because it brings you, you know, what you may have, and understanding the true feelings from others. That is not masked, because a lot of times leaders, I think we will have situations where whatever people are telling you are not what they're truly feeling or thinking. And so how do you bring that with you in your leadership positions, in your journeys? Again, I think I really want the panelists maybe to talk to us about, what about being an AANHPI leader? What kind of strengths you have leveraged because you are a leader from with this culture that you have inherited? And what are some of the things where you have experienced yourself or observed from others are some of the witness from this group that others should pay attention to? So maybe pick one or two, either strengths, it can be both, or strengths or a combination of strengths of witness that are really, you think, or your experience are unique to the AANHPI leadership. Feel free to chime in. Usha?
Yeah, so I don't know if this is unique to us as Asian Americans, but you know, we often kind of go through this sense of, am I really the right person to be here? I think as women, we go through that quite a bit. And in our Asian cultures, I think, you know, I was raised to be seen and not heard. And, you know, there was a life plan laid out for me, right? I was going to either go be a physician or an engineer, or I was going to get married and have children. And that was the life path. And would you please listen? Because that's what everybody else in your family did. So when I finished my PhD and I was offered these positions and things, there was always a sense of self-doubt. You know, am I here? Is somebody going to come tell me that I don't belong in that chair or in that office? And it's a difficult one to work out of. And for me, having that trusted community of key people that believed in me, that I could go to and say, I feel like this today. And I see Sharon, I see you nodding, you know, so that's what has helped me along in that journey, is to be able to go to that trusted group and say, this is how I'm feeling. Or, you know, my provost said this to me. And do you think he was talking to me, or was he just talking in general? Because you go through that constant doubt because, you know, you're never really quite sure if this is where you belong.
Great. Sharon, do you have anything to share?
So I did want to, I want to validate what Usha said. I completely agree. I think one of the things that I would like to say, because it's been hard for me being raised the way I was and being an Asian woman, we need to really avoid the need to be liked by everyone. And I think that's been said in different ways, but you're never going to please everyone all the time. It's impossible in a leadership role. And so but that is a really hard thing for my mentees to grasp, is that sometimes you have to do things that are going to be unpopular, or that you have to rule against something that everybody seems to want, because there are issues of fairness and equity, and also budgetary constraints and, realistic things. And so that is one thing that I try to teach my mentees. And then also to have a diverse support system, right? It's important to have your community, as we've just said, your trusted friends and colleagues. But I really try to make sure I have a diverse support system in place. And I do find that really has served me very well.
Right, thank you. So it's the support system from both family, workplace, people who have shared culture, but also like shared opinions where you can go and when you have doubts, they can validate.
Maybe I could add a little bit more as well. I really enjoying this discussion. I think one of the aspects you mentioned is not to be afraid of conflicts, and actually to embrace conflict. And that is the way for growth, both for yourself as well as for your team. And as a leader, I think it's important that we have to exercise our leadership. That means if somebody is not performing well, to inform them of that and to be very honest and direct. And at the time when it's needed to find another person for that position, that might be the best decision for the entire team, and to be thinking in that perspective, but also to get everyone's consensus as much as possible, and get everyone's input, because they all have different perspectives, and to learn from all of those perspectives, and not only look at what your perspective is and make a decision on that, but embracing that conflict, making those tough decisions is why you're in that position. And so you need to exercise it.
Right. And Ling, I see that you have raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. I really appreciate all of you talk about, one of the UCLA Health president who shared with me, if you are the leader, and if you want everybody likes you, you did not do anything. So I really appreciate Sharon, and we shall talk about that. But another thing I think important is when Asian American and Pacific Islander become the leader, we inspire the students. We also inspire and people in the community. We inspire our faculty. So for example, when I came to UCLA, I had a faculty just say, you are the very first Chinese American dean in the UCLA, and we are so happy you are here. And all of a sudden, I feel my responsibility is not just to do the deanship, but how we create a sense of belonging for everybody to feel good in the community. Thank you.
Right.
I'd like to echo what Dr. Lin Zhang just said about the importance of role models. I think, and that's why this panel and this discussion is so important. Somehow I suspect that the lack of Asian American presence in leadership roles and lack of role models could potentially perpetuate the situation if we don't break the cycle. The other point I want to go back to the previous discussion was, at least for me personally, that I feel that the Asian American or Asian culture may have had some imprint on my leadership style. Just like I think Dr. Menon was referring to, now I'm going through a executive coaching and by my institution, and one of the as part of the coaching, I was going through a 360 review, basically get feedback from your peers, your supervisor, your direct reports, and it's anonymous. And so one of the feedback I got was that I'm very calm, I'm very unbiased, and data informed person, but at times that they feel I'm too soft spoken and my voice not loud enough in the executive room, boardroom, and so I think it has pros and cons. Obviously, that people feel that you're a good leader in a crisis, that you keep the ships sailing and you don't cause panic. But other times, you feel like you don't show emotions. When we have big win, you don't celebrate like the other traditional Western leaders. They give shout outs and they're as much more internalized, and even though people don't see my anger or emotions, and if they really irritate me, and rarely, and they don't see that, and sometimes I feel that may be part of the culture that's could be potentially impeding the leadership, because it's really not mainstream Western style.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, thank you. I think you can then overcompensate in maybe over preparing in those boring discussions where you can't practice loud voice in a way to advocate for, what you want. There are always ways that you can, work with the weakness. And I also see Phyllis. We'll have you.
So I just wanted to reemphasize a couple of points. What Dr. Zhao said to us in the beginning about his being an introvert and yet having to learn how to lead as an introvert really resonated with me. And I bet it resonated with several of us on this panel, because we are not naturally loud people. And yet somehow we have to be able to understand that loudness is not a prerequisite of successful leadership. So that was really important to me. And also what Usha said about demanding or asking for a coach as she changed positions. I was never smart enough to do that, but I could have really used one. So I think that's a good message to send out. Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you all for joining us today to share with us your personal stories. It is so important that all of you are role models, and we want all of you to represent the population, but also encourage all of those who may be thinking, who may be still doubting about your own ability to be a leader. Look at this great panel that you can be one of them one day, but we want you to be prepared. So think about all the strategies many of them have shared with you, how you should negotiate with what you have. You all have a lot to offer. Negotiate when other people recruit you because you bring in a lot of NIH research funding, maybe ask for a leadership position to go along with it and leadership development. It's not hard for deans to make an assistant dean or other positions for you. So I think be smart. We know all of you work really hard, but understanding, we want you to be prepared. We want you to understand you need to have the support to be successful, and you need to be assertive, but you also need to understand faculty shared governance. You need to understand HR legal parameters of an institution. So again, we're here to champion you. We're here to encourage you. We're here to really want to see more of you to be in leadership positions that you will be giving back to this community and support just the health and well-being, not only the AANHPI community, but the entire community in the US. So thank you all for coming today, joining us on this panel. And we're going to switching to our third hour of the panel. How can we create? Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank
Thanks
you.
all. So we want to transition to Winston to really open again our third panel. how can we have a shared health equity agenda? I know there are a lot of researchers in the panel and also in the audience. How can we all together, not alone, all of you are prominent researchers and scientists, and we want all of you to do that, but how can we create this shared, what we call shared health equity agenda, and who need to be in the room and who we need to hear from? So Winston, I'll have you kick us out of this third hour, the third panel that we have on health equity research.
Thank you, Jing. This has been a wonderful 2 hours, and I want to thank all the leaders across these great academic and research institutions that shared us their wisdom and again, their journey. I was wondering if you could bring up the slide that I had to introduce this part of our agenda for this third part of the webinar. This is something I just wanted to share with everybody, in that we're going to jump into looking at what are some of the research priorities of many of the advocacy and policy organizations that are part of the commitment towards health equity in the API Native Hawaiian community. I do think that as I reflect around the work that the National Council of Asian Pacific Islander Physicians has been involved in, I think how this emerges is in these three realms, as I like to think about it. One is about the basic science and the evidence that's important to power through what the issues around equity in the API Native Hawaiian community, of which NASM has been at the forefront of, looking at what kind of data that we really have. And in the API community, the lack of data disaggregation. So I'm sure some of these aspects are going to come up among our speakers, examining the intersection of race, ethnicity, language, and immigration status. The second component I think we'll find in terms of what people will share with us is the whole issue of not just using the science and evidence, but thinking about the socialization and cultural perspectives, and I dare say the narrative that has to accompany the science as it emerges. And I think what we have done is touch a lot upon the issues around the model minority myth and how the narrative that's currently constructed is deleterious to the advancement of health equity in API community. And along that line is making these linkages with regards to what Dr. Xiao had identified, with regards to the tapestry of what the American issues in health and health equity are. I think it means, how do we think about allyship, as we touched upon with our other communities of color and tribal communities, and how Asian Americans start to deconstruct what white supremacy and neocolonialism has meant for the narrative in terms of moving forward. I think the third part of this is that we can have great science, and we can try to deal with the narrative and the socialization and cultural understanding of these issues. But until we really get into the blocking and tackling of trying to think about the political and structural needs that need to be in place for us to really move an agenda forward, for us to confront the issues of inequity in our communities, we're going to have to be strategic and think about using science, using the narrative, and putting the kind of voices and leadership that you've heard in the last 2 hours, and also cultivating the new leaders that come from our communities and come from marginalized communities into the place where they can really make a difference, influencing decision makers and becoming the decision makers. So just some reflections around this section around research and all what we've heard in the first 2 hours about leadership development and how we amplify the voices of the API Native Hawaiian community. With that, I think the individual that help us moderate this discussion will be, again, Ignatius Bao, who's been a leader in working across all these different fields. So Ignatius, I sure would like you to introduce this great roster of speakers we have for the next panel.
Great, thank you, Dr. Wong. So we really see this panel as doing this transition to the other part of what the National Academy of Medicine is about, that we've really highlighted the importance of leadership within academic medicine and the individual leadership, in particular in leading research and leading teaching and leading the development of health professionals in the future. But we also recognize that there are many other ways in which leadership can be exercised by provider organizations like the National Council of Asian Pacific Islander Physicians that Dr. Wang leads, but also other professional associations that we'll hear about, some community-based organizations that we'll hear about, and then some real research leaders that by their individual and collective leadership are really creating that evidence base that we need, that the National Academy of Medicine needs to really highlight both the needs as well as the assets of our diverse Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities to not only show where the disparities and the inequities are, but also where the solutions potentially are as well. And so before we start that, let me first go back to Dr. Jing Wang, who in another role is also a leader in the nursing profession as a whole, and as a leader of the Asian American Pacific Islander Nurses Association. So I want to give Dr. Wang an opportunity to talk about that association as well.
Great. Thank you, Ignatius. And for our staff, you can pull up my 2 slides on the organization that I currently serve as the president for the Asian American Pacific Islander Nurses Association. And I think, next slide, please. I think for this organization, really, it is the professional nursing organization. I have grown up with this organization throughout my journey since I was a PhD student here at the University of Pittsburgh, and really is trying to create a unified voice for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander nurses around the world, and really facilitate the networking, again, making sure that you have the leaders that you can have access to, who understand your culture and challenges that you are experiencing, but also collaborating across the board. Today's event is a great example of collaboration with different groups and a showcase, but also recognizing the critical nursing shortage, especially since COVID, but also the mental health issues that nurses experience with COVID, and the importance, part of AANHPI being part of the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nurses Association together, we have seen how unifying the voices across the AANHPI population and nursing population, but also across all of the Ethnic Minority Nurses Association have really created a national platform for our voice to be heard. So I kind of just want to recognize that, and also the importance of addressing mental health amongst the healthcare professionals as part of health equity agenda that we can talk about today. So thank you, Ignatius.
Thank you, Jane. So then to go to our panel, we've got a really distinguished panel that will share a variety of perspectives. And so first, let me go to Dr. Bei Wu, who is the Vice Dean for Research and a Professor of Global Health at the New York University Rory Myers College of Nursing, and also a co-lead of the Rutgers NYU Center for Asian Health Promotion and Equity, one of the research centers around the country that is focused on Asian American health. So Dr. Wu.
Thank you for organizing this wonderful panel discussion. So I'm just going to briefly kind of discuss, next slide, please, to briefly discuss some of the kind of methodological limitations and challenges on Asian American studies that we talked a lot about minority Asian disparity and Asian as a minority as a lot of these kind of model minority concept. So how actually that this is what we really need to think about from methodological point of view, how to address these kind of issues, think about health disparity and combat these kind of stereotypes in terms of model minority stereotype. So one issue is particularly related to kind of is think about all these potential exclusion of these Asian old adults with limited English capacity and those who are underdocumented. Here, I particularly talk about Asian American old adults because our study, the center I'm going to introduce is related to Asian older adults, but also lack of national representation of Asian Americans in large data sets. We know so many data sets available in the nation, but particularly related to Asian Americans, this is a very small sample size, and particularly all kind of exclusively kind of focus on English-speaking respondents. So that's actually create a lot of, I call this a systematic bias towards Asian population in these kind of large data sets we have. That's why also kind of as a related issue is disaggregated data for Asian American subpopulations. We don't have a lot of data in terms of within Asian population subgroups, particularly, for example, Chinese, Koreans, Japanese, Indians. So it's very limited kind of numbers within these kind of subgroups. So enable that for researchers, we are unable to do a lot of kind of disaggregated data analysis. And also lack of longitudinal data to study these populations, kind of health trajectory, and the multi-level kind of factors that affect their health status over the life course. Then also another important issue is measurement issues, that the lack of culturally appropriate instruments to measure psychosocial factors and the mental health related outcomes as well. Next slide, please. So think about, when we talk about, here's some methodological issues, measurement issues, but also lack of research and the funding towards Asian American health. There's Asian Americans made up 6% of the US population, but very few federal dollars in terms of NIH funding and many other federal kind of funding sources that actually goes towards Asian American native Hawaiian and the Pacific Islanders. And also that we lack of NIH funding, lack of this kind of publications, particularly towards Asian American populations as well. So these are the potential kind of major issues that we're facing in the nation. Next slide, please. So here, what I would like to introduce is this Asian Resource Center for Minority Asian Research. Currently, this is funded by NIA, is one of the first that RICMA center that focus on Asian population. Next slide, please. This Asian RICMA that is a 5-year project. It's actually the purpose is to advance careers of early stage investigators from underrepresented backgrounds through mentored translational trauma and resilience research involving Asian American older adults. So we actually, through this center, we gave a lot of pilot projects, and also we mentor many early stage investigators to address these kind of issues. Next slide, please. So here in this, between 2018 and 2023, this Asian RICMA's goal is particular focus on trauma, stress, and resilience. So that we, last year, we submitted another RICMA, Asian RICMA, that particular focus on Alzheimer's disease and the dementia caregivers. So we received an excellent score. So fingers crossed that hopefully that we will have a renewed Asian RICMA that focus on Alzheimer's disease and dementia care research. Next, please. So our leaderships have quite several leaders in this Asian RICMA to lead this administrative core. Next slide, please. So in this 5-year period, we have funded 32 RICMA scholars that not only learn the kind of interconnected content that's relevant to their own pilot, but also to the broader field through monthly didactic sessions. So we provide a lot of mentorship to these 32 RICMA scholars across the nation. So this actually is to address some of the issues that I particularly specified at the beginning of my talk in terms of methodological issues and lack of our researchers that particularly focus on Asian American research. So next that I would like to introduce that also my colleague that we have another Asian center funded by AANHPI that particularly focus on that promote addressing health disparity, promote health equity among Asian populations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. So let me introduce your colleague, Dr. Soko Setoguchi, who is both with the Rutgers Johnson Medical School as well as the Rutgers School of Public Health and associated with the Center for Health Promotion and Equity. Dr. Setoguchi.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to introduce quickly on the other center called Rutgers NYU Center for Asian Health Promotion and Equity. Next slide, please. So I think we've already addressed these issues. One thing I want to highlight is actually Asian population is a growing population in New Jersey, New York area in the past 10 years, and cardiometabolic health, and then as well as mental health issues has a unique sort of aspect in Asian population, and that's the reason why we're addressing this in this grant. Next slide, please. So this is a center grant. So really, the goal mission here is to provide leadership, organizational structure, communications, and evaluation systems to promote high quality research on cardiometabolic and mental health outcomes among Asian adults. And next slide, please. In terms of the structure, we have 3 cores within the center. One's administrative core to kind of oversee the functions. The second one is investigator development core, similar to the sort of core that described in P30 by Bay, that we also provide support for young investigators and then funding for research. And then the third core, this is really the heart of this center grant, is really community engagement core, where we involve communities to create a sort of infrastructure for community participatory research. Next slide, please. And we also have within the center grant that we have 2 ongoing research, one led by Bay at NYU, another is led by Dr. Brett Benner at Rutgers, kind of addressing very unique intervention tailored to Asian populations. One's really addressing the nutrition side. The other one that led by Bay is really addressing the caregiver interventions. So this is an ongoing research, really kind of meriting the infrastructure that we're creating by the center, but really providing the scientific evidence on important interventions that are tailored towards Asian population. So this is still year 2 of our grant. So this is we don't still have the results to share with you today, but more to come soon. Next slide, please. Little bit about the community engagement core. As I said, this is really heart of the center grant. And then we do engage community locally and then provide lots of events and participates, support events. Next slide, please. One of the events actually upcoming is next week, really the AAPI Heritage Month celebration virtual panel. Here we like to talk about climate change, health issues and healthcare sort of sustainability, and then really unique impacts on Asian communities. And really this is meant to be a conversation between the community and then academic researchers. We have 3 or 4 panelists, community panelists coming on, 3 or 4 academic panelists coming on. And then we were really hoping to, understand what really the need in the community, their kind of research questions they might have addressing the climate crisis in their population. Next slide, please. So within the community engagement core, we created a community advisory committee, and then we've been meeting with them, and then they've been providing a very variable sort of inputs as well as binary sort of communications with the researchers here. Next slide, please. That'll be the last one. And the other thing we are doing is creating a clearinghouse for Asian health research, because there's a lot of research going on, but it's not in a very accessible way to the community. So that's another goal here. So this meant to be a very brief introduction, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. And it's really great to see not only developing that evidence base, but doing that in partnership with communities, particularly with community-based organizations. So our next panelist is Jeffrey Caballero, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Asian Pacific Community Health Organizations, an association of about 35 community health centers throughout the United States, including Hawaii. And Jeff will share a little bit about the work that the association does.
Thank you very much, Ignatius. Before I get started, I just wanted to express my appreciation. I really appreciated and enjoyed the last 2 hours of conversations regarding leadership in the API community, and want to thank the National Academy for the opportunity to participate in this discussion, and for APCHA to be able to share some of our efforts in our community. As Ignatius noted, my name is Jeff Caballero, and in the spirit of this morning's discussion, I just also wanted to say that I too am a first-generation immigrant into this country from the Philippines. My work in this space was provoked by the civil unrest in Los Angeles in 1992. Many were very aware of the impact on the African-American community, but there was tremendous impact on the Asian American and Pacific Islander community that many around our country and our world do not know. And that has helped stimulate my interest in being able to serve our community in that area. And therefore, I've been at this role at APCHA for about 30 years now. To that point, APCHA as an association, as Ignatius indicated, has been in existence since 1987. We're a national association. We're a national membership association of community health centers that serve predominantly Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. We provide, our mission is to promote advocacy, collaboration, and leadership that improves the health status and access of Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in the United States, in the territories, and the freely associated states, primarily through our community health center programs. We as an organization provide advocacy, capacity building, and research support to our member organizations who, as Ignatius noted, number in about 33 community health centers in about 14 states across the country, Hawaii, and the Pacific region. APCHA has existed to provide support at that intersectionality of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander minority health issues, and this country's safety net system of care. Our community health centers serve about 750,000 people every year, of which 3/4 are Asian American, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islanders. About 50% of our population is limited English proficient. Excuse me, but we do have member centers across the country that do serve up to 95% limited English proficient in their patient base. It is not uncommon for our health centers to be providing their medical services in 14 and as high as 42 different languages simultaneously. Also, it may be of interest to folks that about 60% of our patient population is estimated to be first-generation immigrant, of which 57% of our total patient population is on Medicaid, and about 20% is uninsured. So that's just a quick snapshot of the association. What I was asked to do was to really just talk a little bit about our community needs and how we as an organization is working to address them. As a system of care for our underserved communities, you can assume that there's a plethora of health conditions, behavioral health conditions, and that our providers encounter with the patients that they serve. But as a system of providers, AAPCHO's current and primary focus or interest at this point in the limited time that we have available that I wanted to share with you is that we are working, working hard to integrate and utilize the demographic data that exists at our health centers, the clinical data that we have available, and the social determinant of and the data from our social determinant of health assessment tools to give us tools, primarily risk stratification tools, to help us tailor and prioritize the care and the resources particularly needed by our complex and vulnerable patients. This is very important, particularly as many of you are aware, the limited resources at the safety net level requires us to be as focused as possible in trying to provide our membership the best tools available and helping them prioritize and target their care. So that's an area that wanted to be able to share. It is not an easy task because many of our organizations have different levels of capacity, but it is a national priority for all of them to be able to develop and harness these tools, not just to improve the outcomes of their patient's health status, but also to be able to be more effectively utilize the resources that they have to provide care to their communities. So I'll stop there, Ignatius, and give more time to the other panelists.
Thank you, Jeff. So next up, we have Dr. Keawe Kaholokula, who is the chair of the Department of Native Hawaiian Health at the John A. Burns School of Medicine at the University of Hawaii. Keawe.
Mahalo, Ignatius. Aloha, everyone. Mahalo to the organizers as well for the invite. Thank you for my slides. So my title here really reflects the three broad areas that I think as a community of Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders we're moving towards for a shared research agenda nationally. And it's really around uncovering our inequities, because for a long time it's been hidden in aggregation of data, leveraging cultural assets, and really empowering our communities. Next slide, please. I'll start with data disaggregation. Despite the fact that in 1997, the OMB racial ethnic categories removed NHPI from Asian Americans, unfortunately, that habit has not been removed from our researchers and our communities. We continue to see aggregated data, aggregating Asian Americans with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. It continues to be problematic for us, no matter how much studies have come out showing that we don't always have the same level of inequities across the different medical conditions we're concerned about. We need to stop this. We need to begin disaggregating data and ensuring all federal agencies and public health reports and researchers in general, because researchers at academic institutions are seeing what's happening at a national level, and they think it's okay to lump us all together because we're all the same, right? But we're not. And it really masks our health inequities. It keeps resources and attention away from the communities that need it the most. And it's not just an NHPI issue, it's an Asian American issue. Our Filipino colleagues here in Hawaii are telling us how their inequities are being masked because they're being lumped with other Asian groups. And so they can't get the resources, attentions they need. So it's a shared agenda, not just with Native Hawaiians, but with all our Asian colleagues as well. The COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted the need for data disaggregation. It really mobilized our NHPI communities towards this agenda. And I'm glad to say it's part of the White House initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. So it's a step in a great direction. OMB is proposing changes. And of course, we have the recent NIH AANHPI epidemiological cohort study that's coming out soon that calls for further disaggregation within our populations. Next slide, please. just to highlight the level of differences and how they could differ across all groups. There's been some recent studies that did a great job of disaggregating and has highlighted significant inequities, especially here in cancer mortality with this recent publication that I'm sharing with you. I won't spend too much time other than to hit home the point that there's a lot of between group differences between our populations. Next slide, please. But with this other recent study, there's also within group differences. When we start even going further disaggregating Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders into our further subgroups, we're seeing large differences between Native Hawaiians and other Pacific Islanders. And when you look at the Asian populations, we're seeing differences. And those differences vary across different conditions. They're not always the same. So we need to do a better job at this. Next slide, please. Again, resources aren't getting to the communities that need it the most. Attention is not getting. The other thing that we have a shared agenda on among the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, it's great to collect data and to establish our incidence and prevalence of these conditions and disaggregate, but we need to do something about these issues, right? We can't wait till these cohort studies are done 5, 10 years down the road before we find viable solutions. We need more research studies around intervention research studies. And we have to move beyond just culturally adapting evidence-based interventions that did not include us in the original studies to begin with, that tend not to provide the cultural context that are really important for behavior change in many of these interventions. We need to start looking at culturally grounded approaches. An example here is the studies we've done here in Hawaii using hula, our traditional dance. And when we use hula, we find that we not only get great clinical outcomes, in this case, we leverage hula to address hypertension control and risk for cardiovascular disease in Native Hawaiians. And when we looked at Native Hawaiians with uncontrolled hypertension, we found that our intervention could get them under control compared to a control group. But not only that, they also reduced their 10-year risk for cardiovascular disease in the process. But the other thing was not just the great clinical improvements, we got great positive social cultural outcomes. As a result of participating, they felt more connected to their culture, to their communities. They felt like their identity was supported for once in a medical intervention, which often discounts their cultural identity and assets. And those social cultural improvements were directly associated with the clinical improvements. You don't get that with your traditional lifestyle interventions that are not culturally grounded or culturally based. Next slide, please. And I know I'm at 5 minutes right now, but I'll wrap it up. So the other thing we need to have a shared agenda on with NHPI communities, as well as our Asian colleagues, is we're absent. NHPIs are absent in the health science workforce. And I have data here from NIH. You can't even see our bar here because it's so low. It's not even 1%. So is American Indians, Alaska Natives compared to other groups. These are awards in 2022, research grant awards from NIH to principal investigators from this different racial ethnic groups. Now, if we don't have our own investigators, the work is not going to get done. We need to grow our own. The other issue too is we need to engage our Native Hawaiian Pacific our communities from the get-go. We need to adopt cultural perspectives around community engagement that embraces the way we want to do research in our communities. It's not just about the science. It's about changing lives and changing our lives in better ways, but allowing us to still be Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander in the process, allowing us to still embrace our cultural preferences and aspirations and our preferred modes of living in our own homeland, by the way. Many of our Native Hawaiians, we're indigenous. You know, we're not immigrants. So we need to find these creative ways. And we need to do it because another national priority is increasing diversity in clinical trials, but our communities have no trust in medical science, in research, because of past transgressions and so forth to our communities. Next slide, please. So I just want to end with saying that there are some NIH support initiatives, at least, that are really moving in a great direction, I think. And if we can create more of this, if NIH can do this, I think we can begin to address some of the health inequities that we're seeing. One of the things is the CEAL, the Community Engagement Alliance Initiative, that I think 21 states are participating in and so forth. They have a component that are focused on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islands. I co-chair the special interest group for that with Grace Ma. And then there's the AANHPI, Intervention Research to Improve Native American Health. The good news is Native Hawaiians was included in this with American Indians, Alaska Natives. Our Pacific Islanders, unfortunately, were not included. So we need to we need to find a way to get them included, because a lot of our intervention work, like the hula study I presented, was actually supported through this mechanism. And of course, the other thing we're all looking forward to is the large cohort study in our communities. For once, we'll have an ability to look at the problems affecting our communities by disaggregating them to specific subgroups and so forth. And I'll stop there. I'm over time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiave, and thank you for leading so much of this research in Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander health, and the importance of continuing to be promoting more researchers, more health care providers from Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. So next we have Dr. Gilbert Gee, who is the chair of the Department of Community Health Sciences at the Fielding School of Public Health at the University of California, Los Angeles. Gil?
Good afternoon. I'm so honored to be here to present, and I really am thankful for all the organizers for this inspiring series of conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about social determinants of health equity that are most relevant for our communities. As many of you know, social determinants are the non-medical factors related to where we work, play, worship, and so forth that determine our health, longevity, illness, and so forth. We have a pretty good history of some work on place, but I think we can certainly do a more complicated job of thinking about it. So for example, a lot of work has emerged on ethnic enclaves, places like Little Manila, Chinatown, and so forth. And a lot of the framing has really been on protective resources of these communities, which are certainly important. At the same time, we also have to think about what are some of the drawbacks of being concentrated. So for example, many of these communities are also in areas where there's high traffic volume, lots of pollution, and so forth. And data are emerging from N. Haynes, for example, that show that Asian Americans have higher body burdens of things like mercury, cadmium, arsenic, and so forth, even when we control for things like diet and so forth. In addition, when we think about the work environment, so that's the place environment, but we also need to start building more research on the work environment. Many of us work in segregated occupations, for example, nail salons and so forth. We really need to do a better job of building that research base. But in addition, besides thinking about specific occupations, we really need to think about social class in the bigger picture of extraction, of power, of which groups benefit at the cost of other groups. And I don't think we really have a strong science base in general on that topic, but especially with regards to our communities, I think that's important. There's almost no research on play, but I think that's a very important place. Many people spend much of their time online. Sometimes their online lives are more important than their real lives. I was made acutely aware of this when I was talking to a friend of mine who's deaf, and in real life is living in poverty. But online, she says, I'm a millionaire. In this space, she actually has a lot of social capital, a lot of resources, and we know very little about what's going on in terms of our play. And finally, in terms of places like where we worship and so forth, there's definitely an emerging research base showing that there's a lot of protective effects on health related to, religiosity and so forth. But we really need to continue this line of research because we all come from different kinds of places of worship, and we know very little about that heterogeneity. Now, and a key issue for Asian Americans in particular is that many of us come from immigrant communities. And I think we really need to deepen that research base. For example, some new research is emerging from scholars like Brittany Morey, for example, that are showing that things like the kind of visa that you hold actually provides a kind of stratification. And so different kinds of visas are associated with different kinds of health profiles. And finally, another key part of this is the need to think about us in terms of a diaspora. We do not represent, those of us who are in America do not represent the Asians that have stayed in Asia. We have a massive selection bias that drives our image of Asian Americans as being healthy and so forth. But when you consider the health of people in Asia proper, it's not such a rosy picture. And we really need to do these diaspora studies that are longitudinal. We have one I run along with my friend Butch de Castro, the HOPE study, where we follow Filipino immigrants and we do data collection at baseline before they leave, and we follow them to the US. We need more studies like that, where we can compare people in other countries to those that are here. And finally, it's an amazing place now where many of us are talking about heterogeneity, how we need to have larger samples and disaggregate and so forth. A few studies are starting to have samples that are getting to be a little bit larger. But as we do that, I think we need to develop a science of heterogeneity. It's important for us to acknowledge the diversity within our communities, but we are kind of doing it almost ad hoc. And I think we really need to think carefully about what it means, under what conditions whereby we really need to start thinking about groups and bigger processes, like, for example, whether it's related to immigration policies, related to refugee status, and so forth. And so I'm at the end of my 5 minutes, and I'd love to turn it over to the next speaker.
Thank you, Gil. So next we have Juliet Choi from the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum. Juliet is the president and CEO and also serves on a National Academies committee that is looking at the federal government and its policies around inequities and how to advance health equity. Juliet.
Great, thank you so much. Really honored to be here. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for just helping to make sure we have this type of space and forum for convening. If I can share, out of all the prestigious panelists who've joined today, I am actually one of those recovering attorneys based in Washington, D.C. So I already feel smarter and healthier just being part of this group and having the chance to hear from you all. I also want to extend a special thanks to everybody that's joining us virtually and the National Academy staff to making sure that the resources, the conversations today will be made available and memorialized. For the Health Forum, let's see, I think we just have a couple of quick slides and we can go ahead and advance to the next slide. Bottom line, we're a health justice advocacy organization working with a network of over 170 community-based organizations across the country, really advocating for health and wellness and equity for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities. For our conversation today, I actually wanted to share a Washington, D.C. lens, given the import of the health equity research agenda all of our colleagues are highlighting here today. For the Health Forum, just in case you are curious, for this year, 2023, a couple of our top policy priorities include, number one, the impact of Medicaid unwinding and the impact of that for our AANHPI communities and families. If you're not aware or you don't understand what the Medicaid unwinding issue is right now, I will ask the National Academy team to make sure we follow up with some materials for you. This is an issue of where almost 1 million Asian American, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders are at risk of losing their Medicaid coverage or their CHIP coverage. So kids who would gain access to healthcare. So this is an all hands on deck proposition for all of us in 2023. Number two, from a policy lens, and I'm so glad Jeff is here from APCHO, just to bring about some awareness and to put a spotlight. A lot of us together in partnership with you, the providers, the researchers, and my good friend and colleague Jeff and APCHO and a lot of other advocates in the health advocacy space. For the last 20 years, we have collectively worked with Congress on what's called the Health Equity and Accountability Act, or HEA for short, because we love acronyms. This year is particularly important. It's the 20th anniversary of introducing this model legislation that is led by the Tri-Caucus. So there's a coalition effort with the Black Caucus, the Hispanic Caucus, and the APA Caucus. And this year in 2023, in this congressional session, the Congressional APA Caucus, championed by APCHO and the Health Forum, were leading the charge in this congressional year. With today's conversation with regard to health equity and research agenda, I also want to spotlight within this model legislation, there always has been, and the language continues to be bolstered on a research health equity agenda. There includes language that talks about the impact on particular diseases, oral health, obesity, uterine fibroid research, Alzheimer's research. There's a larger and growing emphasis on the need for diversity in clinical trials, which I think a lot of our other colleagues have highlighted. I want to put a backdrop or context to this so that our audience understands and appreciates. One of the leading funders of research is the National Institutes of Health. And I am sad to say that since 1992, the NIH research budget for AANHPIs has been less than 0.3%. Not 3%, but less than 0.3%. I want to end my remarks on a good news story. A lot of our colleagues have highlighted the legacy efforts that has led to transformative change. The Health Forum continues to partner with a lot of you. And over the many years, I do want to highlight, the Center on the Study of Asian American Health at NYU. There are other universities as well, but particularly giving a shout out to Stella and Simona there. The center there, which is a recognized NIH National Institute on Mental Health and Health Disparities, has created what they call Innovations and Data Equity for All Laboratory, or the acronym is IDEAL. If you're not familiar, take a look at it. I think this is an opportunity where other universities and researchers can amplify some of the really good work, the innovative brainstorming that is occurring, which does include making sure how do we amplify model research where we uphold standards around disaggregated data and questions and research for AANHPI communities, and making sure we continue to do a comprehensive scan on the unfolding and evolving research for all of our communities. I know my time is up. Really looking forward to hearing from the rest of our panels. If the Health Forum can ever be a resource to any of you collectively or individually, please don't hesitate to call upon us. Thank you. Thanks, Ignatius.
Thank you, Juliet. So our final panelist is Dr. Marlon Garza-Sarria, who is the president-elect of the Philippine Nurses Association of America and also a practicing nurse in Santa Monica. So Dr. Garza-Sarria.
Great, thank you, Ignatius. Really honored to be here with all the panelists. And in the spirit of the conversations, I also wanted to share that I am a first-generation immigrant. It is refreshing and daunting at the same time to hear the scope of the work that is being carried out. And I am sure that platforms like this will get us closer to our goals of advancing health equity. So thank you to the National Academy of Medicine, the Asian American Pacific Islander Nurses Association, and the National Council of Asian Pacific Islander Physicians for inviting the Philippine Nurses Association of America to this collaborative virtual event in observance of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Every organization has a story. The Philippine Nurses Association of America was founded in 1979 in response to the exploitation of foreign-trained nurses through temporary work visas. 5 independent associations of Filipino nurses from California, Illinois, Michigan, New York, and New Jersey came together to form the organization we now know as PNAA. The current mission of PNAA has evolved and does not reflect the work environment of the 1970s and the 1980s, although some issues, particularly related to working conditions of immigrant nurses, persist to this day. PNAA's why. Why do we exist? Is the spirit encoded in our mission statement to uphold and foster the positive image and welfare of Filipino American nurses, promote professional excellence, and contribute to significant outcomes to healthcare and society through education, research, and clinical practice. Of the 4.4 million nurses in the US, there are about 180,000 to 200,000 nurses of Filipino descent. I know it is hard for some of us on this webinar to believe that Filipinos make up only 4% of the registered nurse population in the US, particularly for those who live in coastal metropolitan cities in California, New York, and New Jersey, where you cannot walk through a hospital without seeing a Filipino nurse. But listen to this, only about 4,000 of those belong to PNAA. It is a relatively small percentage, but an influential and impactful small group. What we have done to advance health equity, I am very proud to report that PNAA embraced the National Academy of Medicine's report, The Future of Nursing 2020 to 2030. We are not only looking at the bidirectional relationship between PNAA and the society. More importantly, we are looking at how we champion health equity within our own organization. It is not intuitive for an ethnic minority nursing association to have a diversity task force. PNAA, however, had a discernment that resulted in an increased awareness of our implicit biases, even within our own community. Biases related to generational differences, religious affiliation or lack thereof, sexual orientation and gender identity, regional, tribal, linguistic biases, among many others. We realize there's a lot of work to be done. Our diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, and social justice, we also turned that into an acronym, task force created a strategic plan that includes promoting transgender and gender-affirming care equity through sensitivity training for our members as our first initiative. One of the most impactful and visible initiatives of PNAA is our community presence. I am not calling it outreach, as we are already deeply embedded and engaged in local communities. Our local chapters, all 55 of them, spend considerable time and effort within their local communities, not only contributing to improving community and public health, but also sharing and enhancing Filipino culture and values. I wanted to call out one of our preeminent nurse scientists, Dr. Danet Lapis-Bloom, who through her PCORI-funded research created a community-based nationwide network of NIONs, which translates to villages, to engage Filipino Americans in their healthcare. The NION network leveraged the infrastructure of PNAA in California, Hawaii, Texas, New Jersey, and New York to engage Filipino Americans in research centered on health promotion and disease prevention. PNAA has also partnered with organizations that include the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Nursing Associations, the Asian and Pacific Islander American Health Forum, the Alzheimer's Association, and the Collaborative Center for X-linked Dystonia Parkinsonism at Massachusetts General Hospital to address issues that range from global issues affecting population health to a rare disease linked to a small island in the Philippines. Yes, we have been busy, but we are not stopping anytime soon. On behalf of our president, Dr. Gloria Berriones, thank you for this opportunity to promote PNAA and the work we have done and will continue to do to advance health equity for all.
Thank you so much, Marlon. So let me thank again the terrific panelists for sharing all their perspectives and their work and their priorities. And let me turn back to Dr. Marshall Chin for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ignatius. I'll just say a few comments, then turn it over to Winston and Jing for wrap up. So I think it's been a couple long walks in DC I had with Jing and with Gil, and we came to the conclusion that what we really need is like a National Academy of Medicine consensus report on Asian American health. That we just, you can tell from the panel that we just so much we don't know, and so many priority issues that we need to explore. And maybe part of what we need to do as a community is making a clearer case for those two things. You know, what do we know? And then what are these high priority conditions and areas and questions that we need to do further research on? Some is process, like Kei had mentioned, for example, community grounded research. And some is very specific, like Gil was getting into like a whole variety of different issues with the heterogeneity and place and play and work and whatnot. There's an endless amount of important questions. I'll turn it over now to maybe Winston and Jing to finish up.
Thanks so much to all the participants. And I just wanted briefly to reflect on the three segments we had. We had a great personal narrative from Jing and Victor with regards to their journey. And then we had a second portion that was really asking established leaders in some of the preeminent institutions and academic centers across the country talk about leadership. And finally, this third part with regards to really identifying what are the critical issues in research to advance the agenda. In other words, we have critical mass, and the critical mass needs to now combust. It needs to combust to provide credibility and validity to the issues that face our community and how we embrace those as Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander leaders. We have to ask ourselves, not just what needs to be done, but how do we show up as leaders, as Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians? That's what I'm taking away, and I'm inspired by all of your voices. And I want to certainly thank Professor Wong, Jing, as now a newfound friend, but also a real champion for moving this agenda forward. I think we can do it. We need to set some targets for 2023 and 2024. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Winston. And I want to thank, all of you who are featuring here and really helping me organizing this webinar. I want to thank all of the organizations, all of our fabulous panelists for your research, and also the organizations that you represent, that you bring to the table. I want to thank all of the National Academy of Medicine staff for helping us organize this. I hope all of you know that this is just the beginning of the conversation. And for Ignatius, Marshall, and Winston, I think we want to let you know that please, we'll be sending out the post-webinar survey for all of you. We already have a lot of information, a wealth of information we have collected that we'll be sharing with all of you as resources and links. And we encourage you to bring us more, and that we would like to share with, the almost 900 people who signed up for this webinar that we're so happy to share with all of you today. And most importantly, that we really hope that this is, we can't just keep talking about what's important, what needs to be done, how can we get it done? And I believe that we have the right people, we have the right team, but we really need to work together. And especially across all the sectors that we have brought to the table today, but all of you who show up today to listen to us. So stay tuned. We'll definitely keep all of you posted on what's the next step and what can we do together. But I encourage all of you to fill out the survey and let us know what are we missing and what can we share with all of you more. So with that, I'll conclude today's event. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for all what you have been doing to advance health and well-being of AANHPI communities. Bye.
Aloha.